So the honsi yosta kan jokwa. Nai hat sungwawi ne sungwai isa ni ungwai hotain. Nai ne hadik do ni ungwet te keskadah ne ane ondega. Na go and wadi ehta ne gana henyo. I dit ne gan gai hon takwa tano na gada gohta ne ahena gai hodekwi. And da na gohya 21 tate say that ne skano ai to na donyo hek. Da na gohya ni di ungwet te ge ungo yusi ne tone ne skada ha twai gwa ni goha. Eat den wadi ehta den wadat no ha. Da ne te di ne atek ton gwa ni goha. Down the hat to how one jad did, I need to know how to know Henqua. To know he and twas it sat neo eat unguite again hasset. To know the ungot qua hard and unguat nego he or stuck with. And down I eat net never how it guy soon got the what then dirty sat no nisa go we honda. And down I did with what they know ya. Scada and do I got nego have what the tino ha. It tino hat sat one jad. Down it to the neotic don't got nego ha. Down it to he and twas it net went. A go go down hand down and it's go at this side. Now it's scan on one of doing it to now when jack and you got the way. Now I know we hold on it's not known what that to so good got you down the old net Hoyan Twassi. I had again Hasset and can joke a quaggy. And down I did with what they know ya, Scada and I got Nigo have what the Tino Henny a quag with that hind down and it's go at this side. Down it to the neotic don't got Nigoha. Down and it's at the way and I uncle yo we say you're stuck with. Now uncle a toyanik, night and get the twit nonny. I the whole win again it's scan out got a do with. I to Hagon did one dakwa net to the way. And down I did with what they know ya, Scada and I got Nigo have what the Tino hen it's at the way. Down it to the neotic don't got Nigoha. Down I hope you are cashung with night and I guess go we hook doing you. I get we hold on it and Honadi hon that so go we hook an isney. 1980 na 80 soda had one of doing this hekai once ago ne tenne takwa and down the out net sit watch ya in the cut gayakwa and down the out net 80 soda soon cut gayakwa and down it toy ya then just enough quine na ne we ho one it's no ni honadi hon that's that kind yard and I did what was on it aso honadi for den dirt it's no ni honadi hon and down I did with what they know ya Scada and why what go have with the Tina han aso honadi for den dirt it's no ni honadi hon that's that kind yard down it to the neotic don't go ni go ha down as a go ya dagwa ne ka yen yung gwete ge the yunki and yard to no to ten ju sa no tok nak this ha ne chisak do no ndi sa ha na down han nai ha wa hat doga ya toy na ha ayako ya to gon to yon to wa ya sa ho wan jad nai se ne de tin ta ha nai ha sa go ya dagwa ne ka yen yung gwete ge the yunki and yard ne a ku ya ga sen wan ha ya go the and down the old then how did the question ne ka ni ko ha gesu and down the old now who ya dagwa ne said wakawana and it's kanya dayo I ne ha we ne hawana ne sun go this high and down I did with what they know ya Scada hand to I want to go ha what the Tino han ne gayen go to get the yuki and yard down the old ne who ya dagwa ne said wakawana and it's kanya dayo down it to the neotic don't got ni go ha down that certainly ho yasin it sun go this side night away ho went ya get dun sa ha gon and then soon a ha to know had you got that quite no took knock this out. Now, yeah, you did to look that when the Daniel was on the day in the host at the hard in it, gonna went quast it. And I, yeah, some go that's us in it, don't go home and it's some go away not in the other tail wafting. And I did what they was on you, so I some gonna went quat. And down I did with what they know, yeah, Scada hand one got nego ha. I said what I had it going here, Hanag and it's some go at this side. Down it to the neotic don't got nego. Down it on you and go what going in it gonna hand you. And get hooked down with them. Okay, hand it. Down out there and to start and get started near Hassan get on water. That's our traditional opening. Anytime our people meet, whether the gathering is small or large, what we basically go through all the things that the Creator has given to us here to go peacefully on earth. It kind of sets the mood to let everybody know just where we stand in this great creation of ours. That it gives thanks to all the first of all the people that are gathered here. We give greetings and thanks that we're all here and healthy. We thank the Mother Earth that she's still doing her duties and all the things that the Creator put down here for us to walk about on earth. We give thanks for the soft winds. And we know that they can be very harsh. And then we go up into the sky world. We give thanks for the thunders, which bring the waters and all their duties. Our elder brother, the sun, who gives us warmth and helps out what we plant on earth. And then we give thanks for our grandmother Moon, who has control of some of the waters and the woman and bringing the children into the world. And we give thanks to the four protectors who watch about us on earth, and also the stars, our grandfathers, the stars. So we're giving thanks that these are still doing their duties and that help us in our everyday life as we go walking about. We also acknowledge one of our leaders that brought a message to us more than 200 years ago, which basically enabled us to continue our culture and still be in the world that our brothers brought to us. So he brought us a message there that we're to continue with our language, our culture, our customs. And so we honor him in giving us the path so that we're still here today. And we ended up by giving thanks to the Creator, who still sends his love down to us every day. And we're always reminded of that. And we can always make things right with the Creator that he's also given to us. So this is what we do. It's very brief, a brief version of the what we call the Ghana hand and the words before our elements. So it kind of gives you a tone of whatever the meeting we're going to talk about, we must remind ourselves as to what part of we are in this creation. We've always had that great connection with the land, with the waters, with everything. Everything we're here because of those things, and we can't forget that. Like I said, that some of these speeches can go on for quite a while. The elder speakers giving thanks and going into very detail to all of these things that have been given to us. With that, we would like to start our event here, and I'd like to introduce one of our Clanmothers, Clanmother of the Turtle Clan from Onondaga, Freida Jacques.
You're going to introduce who's here?
Pardon me?
You're going to introduce who's here?
I will, yeah. Or do you want to?
All right. Good morning. Yuhaskanu. We're here today because we're going to appeal the land rights action that we put and filed in 2005. I'd like to read how we opened that land rights action. The Onondaga people wish to bring a healing between themselves and all others who live in the region that has been the homeland of Onondaga Nation since the dawn of time. The nation and its people have a unique spiritual, cultural, and historic relationship with the land, which is embodied in the Great Law of Peace. This relationship goes far beyond federal, state, and legal concepts of ownership, possession, or legal rights. The people are one with the land and consider themselves stewards of it. It is the duty of the nation's leaders to work for the healing of this land, to protect it, and to pass it on to future generations. The Onondaga Nation brings this action on behalf of its people in the hope that it may hasten the process of reconciliation and bring lasting justice, peace, and respect among all who inhabit the area. Later, we will go through what we asked in our land rights action, but I'd like to ask Oren to introduce our leadership here who are sitting here. Thank you.
Nawahaskano, Joy Gusso and Justa. Onondaga Heno. My name is Oren Lyons. I come from Onondaga. And today we have with us representatives from the Haudenosaunee, more popularly known as the Six Nation Iroquois. And leaders that are here, if they will stand as I speak, the spiritual leader of the Confederation, whose title goes back over 1,000 years, Tadodaho Sidney Hill. And we have Chief Jake Edwards, myself, Faith Keeper Orrin Lyons, and we have Clanmother, who is my Clanmother, Freida Jacques, and Chief Howard Thompson, Chief Sam George, and Clanmother Inez Jimerson, Bear Clan, and Faith Keeper Carl Hill, and Chief Stuart Jimerson, one of our elders, and Chief Roger Hill, and Chief Stuart Patterson. And these are the people who are representing the Haudenosaunee. This is a broad spectrum of the Six Nations. And so, okay, that's it. So we'll begin. And you have the press release, and I'm going to pretty much follow it. We are filing the appeal today. And the appeal, which was a dismissal of the land rights action, out of hand. I mean, simply a dismissal. Didn't even reach the court, didn't even reach a discussion. And so what we want to talk about is the history that very, very few people in America know. I'm a history professor at the University of Buffalo for 38 years, and I taught your children for all those years, and I know how much you don't know about our people. And I also know, through the books, how lacking that is in there. So, with the Haudenosaunee, we're also known as the Iroquois Confederacy, and we're here to remind the United States and the leaders of the word, your leader, your first leader, Onondaga Nation. That's George Washington's name that we gave him. And that's the title that we address your present president. That's the title that he holds as Tadodaho, and that all these leaders hold. Those titles are old, and so is the title for the President of the United States, Onondaga Nation. And it means he burns villages and towns, because that's what happened during the Revolutionary War. And so we address the President of the United States as Onondaga Nation. And the first president of George Washington, how that came to be and how your United States began is a very old story. And our people were involved with it for 300-400 years of many meetings over many centuries and many places all along the eastern coast. And beginning originally with the discussion with the Dutch, 1613, what is now Albany, New York. At that time, we said, and they wanted to have a trade and agreement, a trade. And we said, yeah, we've been watching, we don't think you're going to be leaving. And so why don't we sit down and talk about relations? So we set and established relationships at that time. It's called the Turo, the Gaswenta, two-row wampum. And that established our relationship all the way through. With the two-row wampum, there was also established the Silver Covenant chain of peace and friendship. And as you go through your history, you hear your leaders again and again remark about polishing the chain, keeping the chain clean, keeping the chain shiny. 3 links, peace, friendship, for as long as the sun rises in the east and sets in the west, for as long as the waters run downhill, and for as long as the grass is green. And as I looked out today, grass is pretty green, water's running downhill, sun's right on time. And so it continues. And this is what we're talking about, is the continuance of this event. So during the development of your confederation, in the early parts when you were struggling as colonies, you asked us to join in the coming battle with your father. And at that time, your father was the King of England. And we said, well, we know your father very well, had long dealings with him. We know you very well. Not a good idea to get involved in a family fight. And they said, good, because that was our second request. If you're not going to fight with us, don't fight against us. And we said, that's a good idea. And so treaty belts were struck. And we sent runners all the way to the Great Lakes and explained to them we were going to try to hold a peace while the family settled their business. And that's how it began. And in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, 1744, there was a meeting being held there, governors, and they were arguing over land. And Onondaga chief said to them, he said, you know, you're never going to amount to anything until you learn how to work together. He said, why don't you make a union like ours? Look how old we are. Look how respected we are. And he talked to them. 1775, they asked for a meeting at Albany and a peace conference. So we had a peace conference. In 1775. And it was attended by the Continental Congress. And we had agreed on this position of neutrality, so we were going to finalize that. And at that time, they said, in 1744, in Lancaster, you instructed us to make a union like yours, and now we're going to take your advice. We're going to make a union like yours. Now, I'm sure you don't know those words. I'm sure you have never heard those words. But I've heard it, you know, from the side, you know, Iroquois has something to do with the United States Constitution. You hear that, you know, but nobody tells you where. Well, there's a direct relationship. We are now going to take your advice, and we're going to make a union like yours. And as Yogi Berra said, you could look it up. It's in the record. And so they listened, and we said, it's a good idea. We'll help you. And so establishing the foundations of the United States, your democratic foundations, that's where it began. Didn't come over with the Nina, the Pinta, or the Santa Maria. That was no. There were kings and queens. There was authority, not democracy. Democracy was here in this country, rampant, everywhere, free. Everybody was free. Animals were free. People were free. It was a way of life. There was no other way. That's all we knew. And it transferred. It took some years, about 400 years of discussion with your people, and it transferred. And so today you'd hear about tea parties. And who was the Tea Party? Well, it was Indians. It was Indians throwing tea off of a ship in Boston Harbor, symbolizing freedom. I'm not sure the Tea Party understands that. But there it is. There it is. That's a relationship to be free, to understand that freedom. I introduced two Clanmothers that were here. They have tremendous responsibilities because they're the ones that choose the leaders. They're the ones that choose those men that are sitting here. That's their duty. And let me tell you, they also have the power of recall. So when you talk about democracy, and you talk about a process, you still have a ways to go. But we're patient. We're patient. But time comes now, and when we're coming up here, I think it's time for this country to understand its own roots, to understand how important the Six Nations has been in the history, and why George Washington made those words. In your press packet, you have his speech to the Seneca Nation, and we have Seneca leaders here. And in that speech, the Seneca Nation and the Six Nations, he said, "We will protect your lands." At the Treaty of Fort Stanwix, which he mentioned, "We will protect your lands." And in today's times, you have a Second Circuit Court of Appeals dismissing without discussion the land rights. Now, I don't know what Onondaga would say to them today, but I don't think it would be very pleasant. I think he would be very stern with them about carrying the principles that this country is supposed to be based upon. If you lose those principles, you have nothing. You cannot go about the world proclaiming democracy when you can't take care of what's at home. This is where we're at today. It's very difficult times. As a collective, as a human species, we're in peril. And it's coming fast. And let me tell you, it's coming very fast. And we're going to need each other, and we're going to need integrity. We're going to need strong leadership, because that's the only way the species is going to survive. We're in trouble. But what I'm saying to you now is reminding the American public, because you're the other half of those treaties. Those treaties are between nations and peoples. You're the other half. It's your duty to uphold that treaty. It's your duty to remind your leaders, pay attention. Pay attention. Oh, Suzanne Harjo in the back, please stand. She's an old friend and working on treaties, as a matter of fact, and maybe at some moment you can say something about that. But it's important. I think people understand this issue of treaties. And so back there in those days, the wampum that you hear about, you know, everybody hears about wampum. And what is it? They said it's money. It's valuable, but it's not money. It never was. What it was a medium, a political medium, a spiritual medium. The history of our nation is in the wampum belts. And when we make treaties, there's always a belt. And so in the perilous times when the United States was struggling to survive after General Harmer had been defeated in Indiana, terrible defeat, 1789, they were very destabilized. A fledgling country. You needed the peace of the Six Nations. And that's why Washington spoke so strongly about the Six Nations. And he made that speech saying, we're going to protect your land. We said, we have a peace treaty, we're holding it, we've held it. Nevertheless, we'll make another one. In 1791, after he did the Trade and Commerce Act, he sent General St. Clair back out into Indiana to rectify the defeat of General Harmer. And to make a long story short, St. Clair was beat worse than Harmer. There was a young man fighting at that time by the name of Tecumseh. in that group. You were in dire straits, 1791. And so what was the next move? The next move was the Treaty of Canandaigua, 1794. George Washington said, we need to have a treaty. We said, we have the Treaty of 1775. We have the Treaty of 1776. We have the Treaty of 1784, Fort Stanwix. We have the Treaty of 1789, Fort Harmer. He said, we need another one, Canandaigua. And so, since wampum and the making of belts was the currency of the time, President Washington commissioned a treaty belt. He made a wampum belt. And we have the original. This is the original belt that George Washington commissioned in 1790. Now that is a wampum belt. That is the original. That was made by your president, George Washington, as a promise to the Six Nation Confederation that we would have peace and security in our lands as long as the sun rises in the east and sets in the west, as long as the river runs downhill, and as long as the grass is green. And we're still here, as you can see. In 1613, as we had our discussion with the Dutch, they said, in the future, how will we know? How will our children know one another? And we said to them, you will know us by the way we dress. And that's who we are, and that's why we dress. We maintain ourselves, our culture, and our identity. And we're very able, proud, strong. We do not concede to the courts. We do not concede. We will fight on, just as we always have over these past thousands of years. But we would hope to secure the help of the United States people. That's what we're looking for today. Remind your leaders of the importance of the promises they make. Because if you can't keep a promise and you can't keep George Washington's word, whose word can you keep? I challenge you that. That's your challenge. You have to stand for the integrity of your country, and we're here to remind you. And with that, we'll complete our statement. And I think we have a few words from our friend Suzanne about the treaty. She's promoting a treaty exhibit here at the Indian Museum. And there's a lot of treaties, as you know, Indian treaties, 365 treaties. I'm sorry, well, before you reach here, Suzanne, I want to talk to our lawyer, Joe Heath. Joe Heath will explain the intricacies of U.S. law.
Well, there's a doubly hard job, following Orrin to the podium and then trying to explain this inequity, this unfairness. The land rights action and the appeal that we're filing today is a test of whether or not the U.S. courts can provide justice to the Haudenosaunee and the Onondagas. When Freida read that paragraph that started the land rights action, we filed that in March 11th, 2005. 18 days later, the Supreme Court came down with the infamous decision in Sherrill, using the excuse of equity to deny justice to the Oneida Nation, one of the Haudenosaunee nations, as they tried to reclaim their stolen land. So 18 days after we filed, the floor was taken out from under us. In July of 2005, the Second Circuit followed with another blow. Using the Sherrill logic that it was not fair to wait so long, they dismissed the entire Cayuga Nation land claim. At the time, the Cayuga Nation had no land. They still had the protection of the Canandaigua Treaty, which protected about 65,000 acres, but the Second Circuit said, you can't claim that anymore. That wouldn't be fair. And then the final blow came in August of 2010 when the Second Circuit dismissed the Oneida land claim. Been pending for 30 years. The Supreme Court had made 2 strong decisions in it. In Sherrill, the Supremes specifically said we are not overturning Oneida. Second Circuit didn't listen to that. And based upon that history, the District Court in Albany in September of 2010 dismissed the Onondaga land rights action. The facts aren't in dispute. New York does not even dispute that it took the land illegally. In fact, in Oneida, in Cayuga, when they had some time in court, those findings were specifically made by the District Court that the land was knowingly taken illegally. We filed over 1,000 pages of historical proof from 4 renowned national historians, primary documents. New York said, none of that matters. We don't even deny it. Even if we took your land illegally, your case should be dismissed. So, they did not deny that they had broken the treaties, that they're in violation of the Constitution, which in Article 6 says treaties are the supreme law of the land. And also in 1790, President Washington had Congress pass the Trade and Intercourse Act to protect Haudenosaunee land from New York land thefts. None of that matters. So now we're going to file our appeal and see whether or not the United States can hold up its end of the treaty. Because at this point, they're saying it's not fair for the Onondagas to raise these historic harms. It's too disruptive, they say. How ironic is that? What about the disruption to the Onondaga and the Haudenosaunee? The forced removal from their lands, the loss of their cultural ties to the lands and the waters, inability to protect their sacred places, inability to protect their ancestors' graves, to go out among the land that they've held for generations, to fish and bring home wholesome food, to gather medicinal and food plants. And in the time that New York has stolen this land, and we also named 5 corporations, the 5 major polluters in central New York, because in those 200 years, the sacred lake at Onondaga, where the peacemaker brought the Confederacy together, has been turned into the most polluted lake in the country. And so they've had to endure the shameful pollution of their land and not have enough of a voice to resist that. So that's the status. That's what we're challenging. And all of this dismissal and failure to live up to the history comes in the name of equity from our courts. Equity. But of course it's not equitable because it's based on a 15th century racist doctrine called the doctrine of discovery, and we'll go over that some more. And so what the Onondaga people and the Haudenosaunee people are asking for is truth and healing. We have to admit these historic harms and come together, use the great law, the principle of the great law that says when you have a problem, everybody needs to put their good minds together and find a solution that works for everybody. It's time for truth, it's time for healing. Thank you.
Joe's a good fighter. The doctrine of discovery. When we went to Geneva in '77, we went there searching for some kind of redress for things like this we're talking about. And we didn't understand how it was that we were not part of the human race, how we were not included in human rights. Why was it that indigenous people did not have human rights? We didn't know. We had no idea. Over that period of time, we did find out. Came from 15th century papal bulls, which essentially said, if there are no Christian nations in these new lands that you have discovered, I, being the Pope, one of the most powerful figures in the history of that time, I declare those lands to be empty, terra nullius. Further, if there are people there and they are not Christians, they do not have title to land. He disenfranchised the whole Western Hemisphere with a statement. And of course, Christian nations said, works for us, good idea. And so it began, but we didn't know that. And it took us all those years, from 1977 to 2007, when the United Nations finally adopted the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. 30 years, the longest vetted document in the history of the UN. But they agreed. 143 countries adopted it, 11 abstained, and 4 countries voted against it. Now let me guess who one of those countries would be. The United States, Canada, Australia, New Zealand. Voted against this amazing statement of this declaration. Since then, they've agreed to support it. They didn't agree to adopt it. They agreed to support it. And again, we come to legal terms. These legal terms are slippery. We come to understand we can get beyond that. And the whole reason, you know, what's the importance of indigenous people? Why should they bother at all, you know? There's only maybe 400 million. Why? Well, because there's a lot of knowledge in indigenous peoples that you're going to be looking for in these coming days of survival. When you're going to have to be getting back to really basics for survival. And we warn you that it is coming, and it is coming fast, and we are not prepared. So I think collectively we have to think now in these terms. And this doctrine of discovery will be vetted at the United Nations this spring. The United Nations Permanent Forum for Indigenous Issues. The 11th session will have as its primary focus the doctrine of discovery and how it affected the people in Australia and how it affected the people in South and Central America and in Sweden and in Norway. Anywhere there's indigenous people, Australia, New Zealand, the islands, all affected by this doctrine, which said they do not have a right of title to land. The Sherrill decision that you hear about the Oneida, the first notation, I think it's Justice Ginsburg. Is that correct? First notation, the doctrine of discovery. Think it's gone away? Not if a Supreme Court justice is using it as a notation. So best you understand some of these things. Best you learn your history. You know, we've had to learn the history in order to battle for survival. But we've done it. We've educated ourselves against tremendous odds. And, you know, we're not angry. That's the most amazing thing. Well, some of us. But it's amazing how it is, how we look at this. You know, chiefs, peacekeepers, that's the name of our leaders. Oyane, the good minds, that's what they call them. You know, when you say chiefs, you think of a horse and a big war bonnet and a man standing with a lance, you know. No, peace. Those are the tenets of our Constitution. Peace, equity, and unity, the power of the good minds. And we've based our Confederacy on that, and you've based your country on that. And your visionary, Benjamin Franklin, was really what I would call the father of your country, because when he looked at the minutes of that 1744 treaty, they sent the minutes to Philadelphia to be printed, and Ben Franklin said, it's a good idea. Make a union like that. That's a good idea. And he said, I've studied the Six Nations, and I can't find a seam in how they pass authority and power from one generation to the other. And it's through the women. And it's through the women, and one at a time. And don't forget, they have the power of recall. So you got one more step to go, you guys. Even the power of recall to the women, because they support life. That's their number one work. And we're here to remind you of that. I think we've pretty much covered that, and I know Suzanne has been trying to get this treaty studies done and up at the museum over here, because there are many treaties. And what you will see and what you will hear in all of those treaties are those words. As long as the sun rises in the east and sets in the west, as long as the water runs downhill, as long as the grass is green. That's the grandfather, the Kaswenta, of all the treaties. And that's, I don't care whether it's Comanches or Arapahoes, Lakotas, they all use those words. Because in 1613, we set that standard. And it still goes. And we're still here. And regardless of how it may turn out, and this event here is to alert the American public that we are still here and we will fight on. We will fight on. So Suzanne, maybe you could talk just a little bit about the importance of that.
Tadodaho, chiefs, clanmothers, faith keeper, council, secretary to the council, to the Chiefs Council. I'm humbled to be here in your presence and in the presence of the Wampum Belt that teaches Native people and now begins to teach non-Native people again about the power of treaties, the importance of permanence, the importance of honor and duty and care, what it means to have something that lasts forever, a peace that lasts forever. The people came together, Indians, non-Indians, and stood for their nations and had witnesses who stood for their honor of all nations. To look at these treaties, to look at these people, and say, what kind of future are we making for our children? What kind of future are we making for our great, 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 great grandchildren? And here we are. We're the people they made the treaties for. How are we doing? Are we doing well? In order to do well for our extended future families, we need to maintain the honor. We need to maintain the importance of these treaties, we need to keep our word. That's one reason that we're doing the Treaties exhibit at the National Museum of the American Indian, set to open in 2013. I began the process in 2003 with my wonderful co-curator at that time, our most prestigious treaty expert, Vine Deloria Jr., a Standing Rock Sioux man who passed on in 2005 and admonished many of us to carry on this work because it was important to not only our future, but the future of the world. So you don't take lightly that kind of charge. There is no place in academia, there are very few books that tell you about treaties, that teach lawyers about treaties. They don't learn that in law school. There is no judge school. Judges don't understand treaties anymore. Very few do. And the evidence of that is in the fact that they could make decisions saying that the descendants of thieves cannot press their case for recovery of their property because it would be too disruptive to the thieves, to their memory, to the descendants of the thieves and all that they've benefited from the stolen property. So I'm in awe of the people who have come here to instruct everyone patiently, in a friendly way, in a way that is almost beyond human comprehension. What we hope to do at the Museum of the American Indian is to present Native peoples' understanding of the treaties, which is what the law provides. What did the Indians at the time of the treaty signing think? What was their view? That's the entire canon of construction under federal Indian law today. What did the Indians at the time think? Well, you've just seen what the Indians at the time thought. You've seen that evidence, that physical evidence, and you've heard from the people today. So here we are, doing what we do, and we hope that some judges will come from their side of Capitol Hill to the National Museum of the American Indian and take a look at treaties. We hope that they may have their ears opened about this particular case and this set of cases where such an injustice has been done. Thank you so much for permission to speak.
I think we've about covered the ground that we've come here to cover, so I have a few more minutes. If we have any questions out there that people would like to ask, we'll do our best to answer them.
I have a microphone here for questions. Made everyone speechless.
We did that good a job? Oh, we have one over there.
Being patient is a real attribute and, to the steadfastness of the claim that's been there for a long time. But what is your anticipation? What do you think might be the time frame for this to be hopefully settled and done right?
The situation, the political situation of the process is pretty well geared against solving it. I think probably our counselor could explain that a little bit better, but it is an important point because we're going into what you call a loaded deck.
Well, our brief is being filed today. The state and the other defendants for whom the state is paying get 60 days to respond, and then we will get a reply brief. We'll probably have oral argument in the fall. But we go to New York City to the Second Circuit to argue to a 3-judge panel of the Second Circuit. Those 3 judges cannot change the unfairness of the Oneida dismissal. They do not have the authority. So for quite a while, I spent a few sleepless nights trying to figure out, what do I say to these people? I'll probably have a few more. So it's not a good shot. The odds are not very good at that stage. We have to preserve the arguments about fairness. We have a lot of, the brief is about 60 pages. It's very substantial. There are a lot of very valid legal arguments. I spent about 5 years pulling my hair out trying to figure out what they did to the law of equity in Sherrill until in Oneida, they finally admitted it's not really equity, it's not really laches. We've thrown out all of the rules of equity. Equity is supposed to bring fairness to harsh courts. That's where they came out of the medieval England. One of the rules is that if a defendant is going to invoke an equitable defense, you have to have clean hands. You can't benefit from an illegal action and use equity. That would include New York right away. The construct here is laches, that the nation waited too long. We proved that the nation could not have gotten in court for over 200 years. Second Circuit said that doesn't even matter. But the fundamental principle of equity that I briefly talked about before is the balancing of equity. What's the harm to the defendant? What's the harm to the nation? I think we all know where that historical balance should come down. So we hope to go beyond the 3-judge panel. We then have a right to ask for what's called an en banc hearing of the full circuit. They have the authority to begin to correct this inequity. And then, of course, we get to petition the Supreme Court. Their recent history on equity is not very good. After that, we will have exhausted our remedies in the U.S. courts. And that's why the Onondaga leaders showed how much wisdom they have in 1977 when they went to the UN. Because if the U.S. courts can't do any better than they have, it will move to an international forum. And one thing I've learned in the 30 years I've been privileged to work for the Onondagas is this fight will never die. They were talking about it for generations, as you know, and they will talk about it until the harm is healed. As an American citizen, when I try to get over my shame of some of these rulings, it's my job to ask my fellow citizens to hold our nation accountable. Can we hold up our end of that treaty? Thank you.
Another question? Yes, sir.
Question from Russian TV.
Hey,
Hey, just hypothetical. If you win, what do you want to do with the people who live in state of New York? To free the lands? Just
no,
what's the general idea?
what we said in the beginning, in the court case when we first presented it, we said we would not be removing anyone. That was in the preamble. So we couldn't be any more explicit than that, because that was not our intention. Our intention was to clarify the wrong and see how we could adjust it. And we were willing to negotiate whatever we could do, but we were not, and we were very specific about that. As you heard before, we chose out corporate defendants because they can be challenged for what they do. And we chose out the city of Syracuse, and we chose out the county of Syracuse, and we have the support of the city and the county of Syracuse because they want to clean that lake. That Onondaga Lake, which is the birthplace of Western democracy, it started with the Confederation that you see here. That's where your democracy came from, right there at that lake, and it's also the only Superfund lake in the United States. So there's a dichotomy here which is important to think about. It's not just happenstance. It brings the two together. And it's, I think, in the crux of ourselves as human beings. As I watched your president last year, as he mentioned that global warming is here. You suffered great fires last year, up and down. That's the reality. And he saw it right away. He's a tough man, but he said, in no uncertain terms, this is global warming. And the fires were burning in Texas, and the beetles, you can't negotiate with a beetle. He's marching to a different leader, and they're eating the trees, they're killing the trees, and the trees are on fire all the way to Alaska. Permanent frost is melting, the ice is melting in the north. We get these reports right from the ground, right from the hunters. They know it's dangerous to be a hunter today because sometimes they don't come back. But that's the situation where we are today. And I think in the terms of equity and in terms of the issue of global warming, and to understand that this is a global issue that has to be solved globally. It cannot be solved individually by anybody. It has to be done together. So what we're saying is integrity counts. Integrity is the foundation. You're going to have the discipline. If you don't have the integrity to have the discipline, then you're not going to survive. And we're just reminding people of that. These are hard times coming, as you well know. So, no, our intention was not to remove anybody, and we were clear when we said that. Another question?
I'd like to add on to what Orrin said about the land rights action. We called it a land rights action on purpose. It's not a land claim. And our hopes were to begin that healing and to reconcile with those around us so that we might go into the future in peace, that we might live together in a clean environment, that we might help keep the environment well. And we continue on in that effort all the time in making our voice clear about those dangers that are lingering. And that is what we ask, that they clean the land. And our hopes were that we would go on in peace together, living on the land together.
Thank you, Freida. That's a very strong Clanmother. And she just doesn't hold it to this hemisphere. She was over in Kosovo talking to the women over there to help them get through. So she has concern. We have a broad concern. We have a broad spectrum. We think very, very large terms, both in time and space. And are there any more questions? And if not, we want to thank you for coming. Hold on. And we always close the way we open. So our Mohawk representative will close.
Yeah, thank you. We always wind up a meeting with our Thanksgiving address too, just to close off our gathering. Ona ke ni kali wasa so ta ho siast. Chino kwali hot na kanuna o to ta lolo ke ne te to te no hala te chini lo na da ona so tiso. Ne ke no ni sala te ti to ke na te na Chikagyo te itina wala de jaila ka kwego skana no tenyo. Chinakai ka huncha kan kwadi to na tamwale. Nagi no ni sala de itina wala de na kagyo kwa togi na yo tu ngwani gola. Onigi no ne te itina wala de ne itini sta huncha ke. Chiseko kwego ke kotkawa hake na ka te hatsla. Nam de skana ai to no tenyo ke. Chinikali waska huncha kan kwadi tingo tamwale. Ne oni chinakai na lo na tam. Ja kannaka te todoktaani nauto sakotkao ne ka hunchak no kwati ne ta kai na wakuke ne ki nuni se laate deitin olaatu ne tinista hunchake tuki na yohtun kwani kola oniki no ne te tin olaatu te ne china hote ne kalu hyak no kwati sakotkao ne ulo tam ne ki ti to kera te ne chito wa chia kyo keneka kalako te chito no olaatu ci sekulo tali hatu hake to hoswate to hake te am tu get ko in kwata kalita ke china kai na ko huncha kan ko ati tin kwata molya ne ki no ni selade to chito an holade ne chito wa chia kyo ken ka kala kwa tu ki na yo tion kwa ni gola ani ki no na te tin walade te ne tisota asun to ne ka kala kwa te tin walade ji se ko di na wa ko ne ko no ko chini chi ase ta ha di kon sudoke china kai na ko huncha kan ko ati sun da sudela Niki nuni salade, te itina olade ne tisota, asuntana kakalakwa, tukina johtuun kuani kola. Ainakin noa nähte itina waladu tene ochisto kwa sua. Ne tokalo hiaken kuati tiona tamolja. Chikna hoti na teli hun tynjänä taka haatsalat kut kauas. Chinichi tuotsti kahfana chini wasuntes. Ne oni chinichi latiwa austane hun chaaken kuati. Nekin nuni salade, te itina waladu ne ochisto kwa sua, tukina johtuun kuani kola. Ainakin noa nähti itina waladu tene sukua tiso lau hatsala sua ne kainyu kuetake. Ne te sako te nyehtäänin aiju kiinjäätä. Siinä kaliwas kohun tjaakan kuati tinko taolia anto skana ei tuonut tönjyke. Ne oni siinä kain luona tao. Ne vasta kohliena hehasse ne hatili vajottane lauona sua. Ne kiuhoti jottane kun hun tjaakan kuati. Ne oni vahua kenovasta ne skanyata lio ne oni anto ne ahali vajottane sukua tiso lauona sua. Ne kiauli on nuunissa laate teitten laatun kaidin jukuetake tukina johtuun kuani koola. Ainakin nuo nää, tunuja etoitsi nuone lampahtoita naktalagoini, sinä kain luona daam. Luli huizu jättäin tämän tehdään, että niitä kun soota. Neksi tatsi tuon huolaatukin, että jahkana katettu toktaani. Nauto kauhun tjaakan kun aitissa kohta kauan, ne alku eikö ne taakaina vaakokin. Nekin on tatsi tuon huolaatukin seko, joka tunteen ne lauana sua. Ne antoskana ei tuon tänjäkään, sinä kain kauhun tjaakan kun aitin kuota olja. Nekin nuuni se laate, ne tatsi tuon huolaatu, sinä kain luona tao, tuki näin johtuun kuani koola. Ainakin nuo ne on nää oikein on tätä skakasjun kun kuani koola. Tämä on jättili on uutisen kainju kuetake. Ne on jokin jäätä, että ne ole oikein skana, jytito on nekin kuettaa skahdun ja nuuni se laate. On sillä tänä katkojen takia hoita, tuki näin johtuun suani koola. Yeah, that's just a short version of our closing. During ceremonies, we can have some of our elders who are more fluent in the thanks, giving thanks to different things that the Creator has given us. Can take up to an hour sometimes during ceremony. So yeah, you lucked out. You got the really short version. Thank you.